Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to Two Lawyers Talking Law of One. My name is Virginia Robin. I'm a modern shaman and lawyer, and together with lawyer Geraldine Johns-Putra, we are discussing the law of one and exploring what it might look like as if the law as we knew it shifted toward applying more unified solutions. This is a 10-part series in which we will see how the law of one could look as a solution to various societal questions. This is our fourth episode, and we're contrasting today the punitive-based criminal law system with the unifying premises found in the law of one. And before we start, I really want to go back to what the law of one means from my perspective in any event, because criminal law probably is one of the foundations of what we understand a legal system to mean, in that it's got punishments, judgment and punishment. The law of one fundamentally is a unifying system in that we are one energy. In that regard, being one energy, you are everything, every being, every emotion, every situation, every event. You are it. And this means that you can't be separated, being one energy. So this is a very interesting concept when we're applying it to the present systems we look at. And when we see the law as we have it now, particularly from a criminal law position, whenever you judge something, you are effectively separating it. And what I've seen, or the idea that I have behind this, is that our legal system is there to provide rules for an elite to control you. If you have a legal system from that point of view, someone has to say what the rules are, and someone has to give you guidance onto whether you're following the rules. And so in one way, I say we have like a parent. It's a parental-based system. And when we look at it from a very simplistic point of view, when we're jailing people or putting them aside and saying they are not good, by the way, before I go that far, the law of one doesn't have a judgment. It doesn't say something is good or bad. It just is. It is for us and our free will on this planet to assign meanings to everything. So because I might say something is good, you may not. And that is okay from the law of one's perspective. But from the legal system's point of view, being a parental-based system, it's like we've grown up and we still need a parent. And when we were children, in my view, being sent to my room didn't make me into a more obedient child to follow the household rules. So we have household rules and we have rules in society. And I'm not saying rules are bad, but what I'm saying here is in the criminal law system, we get punishment for not following those rules. And does that create a better society? This is really the question. I don't think it created a better society for me. But mind you, I was the child that tried to be good all the time. And when I did try to be the good child all the time, I found that I missed out on a lot of experiences that I was rather admiring the children that weren't so good. And they seemed to be having a bit more fun. But let me put it in another perspective. So this system, effectively, in my view, has an elite and the people that need to follow those rules. We are giving power to others to tell us what those rules are and to make sure we all abide by them. Now, when you're tired, you want to go to sleep. And when you're hungry, you want to eat. It's a natural course of things. When you feel powerless, you want some power back. That's what's called relief. We are all looking for, in my view, we do things, we're motivated to do things because we will feel better in the doing of them. This is what motivates people to do the wrong thing. Why do you do that? The law out there will never prevent you from following not following your own legal system. I say we have an internal legal system. Thanks, Fiona. Fiona thinks we have fascinating concepts. It is a different way of looking at things. I believe we all follow our own rules. The rules and laws out there are wonderful from the point of view that it's a general consensus. Yes, we don't want people killing each other. That is not what we would say as a preference in an orderly society. But people will do it anyway, irrespective of a rule, because you get relief. Relief from something. From what? From having no power within a system. So my idea is perhaps in the law of one is more unifying. We will show people how to be part of the one, that you are valued, that you are unconditionally loved. But of course, nobody really understands what that is. So that's why we're talking today. So what do you think about that, Geraldine?
Yeah, I think you make some very important points, Virginia. A couple of things that I would say is that we are in a transitional phase towards what I would call unity consciousness, which is really based on law of one concepts, that we are all literally one, that there is a correspondence, between what we contain in ourselves to what is outside of ourselves. What is in me is actually is reflected out and shown back to me, because as within, so without, as above, so below. So the power of applying law of one concepts in the legal system is that we focus on individuals to actually create a more harmonious society. So that's unity consciousness, and that's the application of law of one towards unity consciousness in a transitional phase. I see us focusing on removing or rehabilitating or reforming parts of our legal system that create separation the most, the ones in most urgent need. And you and I have talked about certain areas before. We've touched on family law. I made a comment in that episode that family law and criminal law are the two areas where I see the greatest need, where there's the greatest separation and the greatest trauma inflicted on people as a result of our legal system and the way that our legal system is structured now in this punitive way. So I can see urgent need for reform in the criminal law system, and we can talk about that. And then the other thing I wanted to say is that when it comes to the law of one, the first distortion, you can say, of unity or the law of one that applies basically, as my belief is throughout this universe, the first distortion is free will, because that's what enables individuated experience. That's what enables all of us as fragments of the original source to go out and choose different experiences. As you come into a very dense plane like Earth in the year 2022, what you find is that this free will manifests itself in rather chaotic ways, because we are separated. The separation is that we inhabit different bodies, and we don't realize the connection with each other so easily. So there's a physical separation and a mental separation and an emotional separation. And so the way that when we exercise free will here and we create impacts on each other, they occur in a very physical way. For example, if I wanted to hurt somebody, I could actually physically create damage to them, and I could actually end their lives here on Earth. So what we need then, given the way law of one has been, or unity has been distorted where we are, I believe that we need to, we would be better off creating a system that regulates not as punitive laws, but recognizes the impacts we create on each other physically as well as emotionally, because we're very emotional beings here. Regulates those in a way that is fair. You touched on the law having been really a tool that serves the elite. I see a reform that is more holistic, and fairer. So it's one that's agreed upon. And that goes into our political system and how laws are created and enforced, whether the people who do that are really representative of us and whether we've agreed to what they do. So those are the two important things I want to talk about. We're in a transitional phase, and we do exercise free will in a rather peculiar way here. So criminal law, and I think criminal law as a concept, is really going to, like I foreshadowed, going to have a significant change.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned the individuation of each of us, and that is really that is how we who study the law of one understands how the source energy experiences itself. Otherwise, it would be just isness and vanilla, and there would be no experiences had. So each experience is valuable, whether people find that shocking or not. Every experience is valuable for our wholeness. But as you said, when we're talking about an individual, what we tend to do in the criminal law is put people away and think that's going to solve a problem. However, it doesn't, because you are still connected to that individual. We are all connected to that individual no matter what. So even when that individual is released into society, if ever, and sometimes we put them away forever, but that then impacts a whole lot of people. Some others may think this is a good thing to put people away and just forget about them. However, even the so-called victims probably don't get to resolve why they became a victim, what happened in that situation. There's a whole lot of things when we shut, say, non-acceptance of something in society. Everything is acceptable. This is a very difficult concept and probably for another time, but we're just talking basic concepts in here and why perhaps the criminal law, because people are asking questions at the moment. Why do we have so many crimes that keep getting repeated when we have the same result? We keep getting the same result. And I think people are hopefully beginning to understand we need to approach everything from a completely different perspective if you want to change. No, it's not going to change overnight, but we have to start somewhere. And we have to start by bringing more connection to each member of the community to bring value. And, from a shamanic point of view, I've studied the shamans, and it has been the idea that in some shamanic communities where there have been people that are perhaps not following the rules, if you like, that everyone in the community, the elders, ask the question, how are we individually responsible? Because I am you and you are me. So what did I do, or how is my contribution to this situation? And rather than saying, no, put that away, we don't like to see that. We only want this neat package that looks like vanilla and shiny on top. But we are all, and we need to celebrate all of humanity the way it is, because everyone has a perspective and a value.
Yeah. So what happens in criminal law is that the way it's set up right now is that the accused has action taken against him or her by the state. And that is why when we have criminal law cases, we have this the crown versus, or the state versus so and so. So what we do as a community is we say, that's not our problem that a crime, it's a problem that the crime was committed in terms of it's hurt the community. But in terms of enforcing and punishing, we'll leave that to this amorphous state. And the state is all powerful, right? So when an individual accused commits a crime, they then have the whole weight and machinery of the state, the court system, first of all, the police system, then the prosecution and the incarceration system. All of that judiciary comes down onto the individual, and all of us then sit back and leave it to that system. And what that does is, first of all, it isolates the accused. It says, you're no longer part of the state or the community. We come down against you. Firstly, it removes the victim and it removes the community from that whole structure. So what you're talking about with the way it's done in indigenous societies, and we do see these concepts coming back into criminal law, particularly in countries like Australia, where we have indigenous concepts that there have been efforts to marry them back into our legal system. We are seeing that bringing back of inclusive justice, or in some cases it's called restorative justice. I run a podcast, a New Earth Lawyer podcast, that explores ways in which lawyers are changing the practice of law to change the world. And I've had lawyers coming on who talk about restorative justice and the moves that are being made there. There's some very powerful examples given. The one that I've used many times is one in which a young girl was murdered by her fiance. This happened in the US, and the two families knew each other, that of the young girl, the murder victim, and that of the accused, her fiance. And what the family of the victim chose to do was to employ restorative justice concepts, which is that they actually forgave the young man who murdered their daughter and actively engaged in ways in which he could be rehabilitated, which ended up reducing his sentence and allowing him to take steps to make amends. So he actually ended up engaging in community service, talking about dating violence and relationship violence. His sentence was reduced, and he's now in a minimum correctional prison or facility. And they go on and they talk about, both families talk about what they've managed to achieve. The young man is very remorseful. And the community, the families have had more healing, and the community has had more healing. Indigenous,
exactly. And I've there are others doing in Scotland, particularly trauma-informed criminal rehabilitation and getting that into prisons, which is marvelous, because people need to see that they're worth something.
Yes.
You see, this is what we're doing. We're saying people are worthless. But when I say you're worthless, it means I'm saying I'm worthless. And that is not, we're not evolving from that place any longer. We need to see that we are all worthy, that we are all equal, because in the present system, I see it from a hierarchical point of view, we are not all equal. There are people that have the power, and we need to show people you have individual power. I don't know whether you know the story of Brian Banks. He was incarcerated for a rape he didn't commit. He was 16 years old in the US, and he'd just written a book recently. But he talked about, and this is what I say, people get quite angry about crimes that are committed. And yes, it's valid to feel emotion and valid to express how you feel. Absolutely, everybody's expression is valid. What he learned from his book, get it, honestly, it is an amazing story about how he was prejudiced every step of the way. He was an African-American young man. I don't know how old he is now. I'm not sure. But he spent a lot of time in prison for something he didn't commit and a crime he didn't commit. And he ended up being able to see freedom in his own mind. He was able to be free in his own mind. And this is the point of it all. Your life is your response to it. And if he is a shining example of how you can be incarcerated under the worst conditions for something you did not do, as a test, if you like, if he was a God-fearing man, if you like, and I'm not religious, but to say, this is a test for me, and he was able to free his own mind. And when he was able to do that, he was able to get himself free, and he is now free, based on some other evidence. And it was just a beautiful sequence of events that he was able to, the universe conspired, if you like, to then set him free, physically free. But this is what I'm talking about, is everybody's response to these situations is really very individual. And if we keep saying everything is bad and pushing away, we are not going to get anywhere. We need to see everything that's happening in this world as opportunities for our own growth or for our own evolution. It's a big topic that is not taken lightly, because I know some crimes are very, very horrible for people, but it is something that we need to explore. Why is it happening? And with trauma-informed, that's getting back to this, trauma-informed lawyering is to look back into why did someone do that? Why? What happened to them? What did society allow happen to them? And how can we correct it and correct ourselves in the future so that we're not imposing, and I believe it's rules, parental rules on children are saying, you're no good. You can't tie your shoelace properly, you're stupid. These rules that we carry as children are really, really very, very important. But we allow them to define us in the future. And if we can re-educate that this is not defining you anymore, you have a choice as to how you believe you are. And it does come back to self-love. It always comes back to love.
I think what's so interesting about this very topic, and also what we really need to bear in mind as we head into reform of our legal system, and you and I are talking about a particular kind of reform, which is taking it into law of one concepts. What we need to bear in mind is that educating lawyers and judges and anyone involved in the legal system in a spiritual way would ideally, and I say this from my perspective, I don't claim to have all the answers, ideally would give people a fuller perspective of our multidimensional reality. So when we speak of law of one and we speak of oneness, we're talking at a relatively high level, if you want to give dimensions hierarchies, but we're talking at a very overarching level. And then you can come all the way down to where we exist here. And if I punch someone, that person's going to hurt, right? Literally, they're going to feel it. In a way, I'm punching myself, but it doesn't feel like that to that person. That person's going to go, ow.
Because as we know, hurt people, and that's it. You're hurting, they're hurting. So
exactly. But my point is that it has immediate repercussions. So being able to see all the way through and being able also to have empathy for people who are victims of crime, instead of saying, well, it's all one, there's a reason for it, to say, well, on our level, it hurts like hell. On our level, it hurts to be a victim of crime. You can't explain away. There's an immediate emotion as well as a physicality. You can't necessarily easily explain away rape and serious assault and murder and so on and so forth. So taking as full an approach as possible means that we understand, lawyers understand, that we are all one, and that there's a reason that we are responsible for the person, for creating the person who committed the crime, and we also take the part of the victim. We understand that, but we bring it down to where we exist as three-dimensional individuals, and we say we also see that a hurt has occurred. So we've got to balance. Being multidimensional, right, means balancing all of those perspectives. So I talk about rules. I think we're bringing it down to for want of a better term, lower perspective. We're bringing it down to the perspective of, listen, it's not cool to go around hitting people, right? It creates, not only are you hurting that person, but it creates a society that we don't want to live in here, right? So we have what we call rules. And we have, whether you want to call them guidance or rules, but they're ways in which we choose to live. And that's going to create a happier three-dimensional society. So I think that the legal system, the criminal law system, by bringing in these elements that we've been talking about, by understanding the trauma that has created the perpetrator, by understanding the trauma that the victim suffers, by understanding and the trauma that the community suffers, and bringing it holistically, that's actually trying to cover off both the higher perspective understanding of what's going on, as well as the quote unquote lower perspective understanding, or the very individual understanding of that there's been a true physical and emotional consequence here, and also got a kind of middle perspective understanding of that's not going to have that's not conducive to the kind of society we want to live in.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And as I said, we can't go from here to here in one step. We need to sort of have increments about how this will work, from my point of view. And, this isn't la la land. We are energy. This is physics. And when you look at, if we shift the way we look at things from an energetic perspective, we know that we are one, all connected, because energy must flow. And their energy's property is frequency. And if you have low frequencies, they resonate together. And you animate those frequencies in your life. So it's education, re-educating people into that you're an energetic self. If things are coming into your existence that are not preferred, as you say, rather than, we don't reject anything. It's just not preferred. We don't prefer that in an orderly society that's more loving. Yeah, I don't want to punch in the face either,
Yeah, I think preference is a great way of putting it.
Yeah, it's not a preference for us. But there it is. And how did it happen? Nothing happens by accident. Absolutely nothing happens by accident. Sure. So it is why is this a part of my existence right now? And it's time to question it. Sometimes we need to feel some hurt. We have not been allowing ourselves the full gambit of emotion. There's a whole lot of education around this, is what I'm saying. Because if we're looking at each other, as you said before, physically separated objects that have no connection to each other whatsoever, we are on the wrong. We're not looking at it from a law of one perspective. We are looking at it from a 3D perspective. And as the High Court of Australia, when referring to the Indigenous and how they see things as part of one indissoluble whole, is not within the realms of the common lawyer at this present time, because the common lawyer thinks we have proprietary rights over things, like they're separated, whereas the Indigenous see things as all connected. The Indigenous are spot on. It is physics. It's all energy. And when we can start re-educating people from that point of view, I think we'll make some inroads, so that you cannot put a rule around something and make someone do things. People are expressions of the one individual whole. And it stems from childhood, always. We have adults now still acting out their 3-year-old and wanting some closure on that, and trying to mature that aspect of themselves that is not able to express itself properly, not being able to say, I'm worthy. And this is a big deal. And we're still looking out there for the gratification, and looking outside of ourselves for the love that we are seeking. We are all seeking love. That's what we are, I believe, effectively. We've been born into this planet to really disintegrate and pick up the pieces, finding our way home to love again. It's and having the experiences as you go and say, wow, that was an interesting one. But if you can see everyone as an actor in your play as well, I mean, there's a whole lot of ways you can educate from this point of view. But it's the criminal law system. And I think we touched upon this earlier, Geraldine, is also governed by people that have money, that want to keep prisons alive, and that is another factor. It's another hidden factor in all of these things that really keeps the egregore, I call it an egregore of energy, keep people thinking the way, we just got to put people in jails and that will solve everything. But it's not solving anything. It's just making people that own prisons quite wealthy.
I agree. So that's a great example of how interconnected all our systems are. So that's interconnected with the monetary system and with the for-profit system that we actually spoke about in our last episode. So if enterprises or companies were motivated by purpose and not by profit, then you wouldn't have this issue where it actually is good business to create criminals.
Yeah.
One of the other things that I see would happen ideally as a preference in criminal law reform is that we would begin to break down this idea of a criminal law system as opposed to civil conflicts or disputes. And people who are not lawyers might not really appreciate that there is a difference. So in a criminal law system, when you criminalize something, then that's when the framework that I was talking about earlier, of the state coming down upon you, and if you've done something wrong, then it's the state versus you. That's different from when you might have a dispute with your, say, next door neighbor, and it's not criminal. Your next door neighbor thinks you've done something wrong, and they bring a civil matter against you. That's you versus them. When you go into the criminal law system, a lot of things happen, not only, as I said, the machinery of the whole state comes down on you, but you also then create the stigma of a criminal. We all know this, right? A criminal record, which you hopefully can get expunged, or you go to great lengths to make sure you don't have a criminal record. That is another example of how we separate and isolate criminals. We would preferably remove that whole idea of that person committing a crime and being a criminal. And you would see disputes, even the one that I was talking about, where you do something that your next door neighbor thinks is wrong. There wouldn't be so much of a difference between the way we fix or address or resolve those issues with the way we resolve the issue in a criminal matter.
Yes, it's been an interesting, it really is still interesting, isn't it? Why do you have to be punished? It's still
comes
an
down
interesting
to
question.
that. Exactly.
Why do you have to be punished? And it's perpetuating a shame that we've had maybe as children. I'm just repeating, I'm used to this. This is familiar to me, so I'm quite happy. And of course, that's why we have recidivism as well, because people think, well, I know the rules of jail or living my life this way. I know the rules here, and I can negotiate my life that way. And I feel a little like I have a little bit of power in the system, or a power over my life. I don't have power in the world out there where they have the rules, and I can't work with all that, and I'm not a good person like they are, or whatever it is. It's rather, it's just a complete shift of how we approach our fellow humans. It's like you're all valuable.
Exactly. And you remain valuable. And so this is why the indigenous ways of addressing so-called crimes is very interesting, because they don't go into, they might choose to eject a particular person from the tribe if the crime is against the tribe is so egregious. But generally what works well in the indigenous way of addressing these issues is that person, the perpetrator, accused, however you want to call them, remains part of the community, right? And they have an interest in remaining part of the community because the community gives them support, gives them life, so that they will then accept the sentencing that might come from, in Aboriginal, we call it circle sentencing, that comes from the circle of elders. They accept that this is what is needed to remain part of the community. And then after they have redressed their wrong, they are still a part of the community. We don't then say, my God, we can't give you a job because you've got a criminal record, or you can't do this because you've got a criminal record. The stigma is done. They have addressed whatever they need to address. The victim also will accept it. And that's the holistic thing that we're talking about. Another important thing I think that comes from reducing this whole idea of that's a crime and this is a crime, it is, we have what we call victimless crimes in our criminal law system. And, that's like drug offenses or things like that, right? We have created this whole hierarchy of this damages society, and the criminal law becomes a tool, a very powerful tool to regulate behavior, this so-called desirable behavior of people, which goes back to your point about elites, Virginia. If you take those so-called victimless crimes out of the whole criminal law system, and you focus on, like, with drug offenses, it might be a crime in some places to actually be carrying a volume of drugs on you, right? We wouldn't treat that as a crime. We would treat that as an opportunity. If we really had a preference that didn't happen, we would treat that as an opportunity to investigate why that has happened. And an example, and this is not, many people would say this is not a victimless crime, but it's an example of criminalizing something that is at heart a very emotional matter. And that's the abortion debate that's going on in the US. Abortion is criminalized in many places. Is it really a matter for the whole state to come down on a person who has chosen to terminate their pregnancy? It's such that is a great example, and this is why I believe we are having this debate right now in this turning point. It's such a great example of where we really need to be examining. Why do people make this choice? How can we support them? How can we help them, no matter what the circumstances of their particular situation, how they got pregnant? We support them as a community and make it a true community issue, and own it, and don't point at them and say, you've committed a crime and now you're going to be punished for it.
Look, and that is absolutely it's a very, very difficult topic. Of course, people are very divided on that one, and everyone's entitled to their very own opinion. However, from my point of view, I believe that everybody has a right to make decisions for themselves. And this is why I think the law of one would be valuable, because you become autonomous in that you make your own decisions. And people say, well, wouldn't the law of the jungle prevail and the dog eat dog world? But I say that exists already. It is the power that you have more power, you get to say in this society. So I say that exists already. So from my point of view, that if we were able to self-regulate, with some general look, I think we follow our own rules anyway. It's as simple as that. But given the idea we were taught how to make a decision, most people do not know how to make a simple decision. Now, it's a fundamental. Every day you make about 70,000 decisions, and most of them aren't loving to yourself. That's a real key to this. It's just what gives me relief is what I tend to do. If I feel hungry, I'll go and eat. Like I said, if I feel tired, I'll go and sleep. So whatever gives me some relief from whatever my pain is what I do. And that's why we have this crime, what we call crime. People do things that don't follow the rules, and that gave them some relief to do. Now we have to question, why was that giving you relief?
Yeah, so the criminal law system is set up in a way that perpetuates the idea that we don't have self-agency, that if we do something wrong and we step out of society's rules, then, as I said, that all of these consequences that follow, and it's all out of our hands. Like I said, it then becomes somebody else's issue. If someone else has committed a crime, it then becomes someone else's issue to deal with it. So none of what we're talking about is easy. Actually, even if we were to move into a far more evolved society than we are now, the conversations we're talking about having around things like abortion or murder. I mean, it's not like a circle of people who represent the community discussing what are we going to do about this is any easier than a court case, really. But the energetic consequences are quite different. And the trauma that it avoids is very significant, because what happens, and you touched upon this with trauma, is that trauma begets more trauma. Trauma ripples out and touches everybody. So it touches the victim, and it touches the perpetrator, and it touches people they know, and of course it touches the community. So what we're doing is, we're not saying that this is going to be a very straightforward thing to create a system that is more reflective of the law of one. But we're actually saying it's time to, and I think I might have said this before on this show, it's time to grow up and accept the consequences, or accept the implications of being a grown-up society, and deal with those difficult issues. One of the great advantages of dealing with it in this way is, anyone who's done any kind of inner work will know this, right? If you go to counseling and therapy, you can actually make a lot of progress as an individual, understanding why things are coming up for you. This is one of the things that goes on there. Why is this coming up for you? Well, we then, as a community, as a collective, what we call crimes are the equivalent of some conflict coming up for an individual. We then get to say, as a community, why is this coming up for us? What are we trying to learn here? And that's coming back to saying that the community takes responsibility for having created the circumstances for it.
And that's exactly what I see with all these things in the news lately, is, without going into detail, is why are these things happening over and over and over again? Nobody is really addressing it. Nobody is saying, let's look as a community, what is going on? And as I believe, we need to look at the reality from a different place. We need to re-educate. I think that is the beginning of it. Re-educating people to say, you are an energetic being. You are here for the experience of it. And sometimes those experiences aren't pleasant, but you have also learned you have learned how to disconnect from love, and you are trying to find your way back. And this is why you do the things you do. So it just gives people more information about, why is that happening? Oh, I see. It helps us have some compassion for why someone did something, and helps us to, whilst we need to process our emotion about things we don't prefer, it also energetically releases us from the negative tie to something. This is really important, because if we keep spiraling in the negative, and I'll want to address the words victim and perpetrator as well in the criminal law. We have the accused. That's probably different, but victim and perpetrator, particularly the word victim. A lot of people like being a victim. I have to say that quite out loud. And people hold on to that energy because everyone gives them attention, and what gives them love. Oh, you poor thing. Yes, something horrible has happened, but also don't forget the person that perpetrated the crime, something horrible is happening to them also. They just don't do it out of love. They're not feeling loved. And this is what is lacking in this society, is love. We can't, and people they don't know how to deal with love. And I understand all that, and that's for another conversation. But fundamentally, we need to look at, give different labels. This is your experience, and this is your experience from one side and another. And I know that's a big shift as well. But to shift the energy of everything, because we create archetypes, and we fulfill that archetype and keep it animated, and keep the separation of people. And if we don't help a victim address perhaps why they are a victim, or why they're enjoying being a victim, and it might sound harsh, but we've all been there. All of us have been there. We've quite enjoyed being the victim of something at some point. Some of it's a lot larger than in other cases, but we have all done it, and we've enjoyed that little bit of attention, and that's wonderful. But we need to learn how to self-soothe, and how to and all come together in love as a community. And it
I think
isn't Lala. Mm,
that's a really important point, because we've been talking about the community and we've been talking about the perpetrator, but it's a really important element, that is the victim. Why, in a law of one way, or from a law of one perspective, why did that victim choose to be a victim of a crime? And I think that what is quite powerful about restorative justice modalities is that there is this focus on the victim and empowering the victim. So one of the classic criticisms of criminal law, very traditional criminal law systems, is that the victim has no voice. So we've tried to address this in the past, where we do have victim impact statements now given in court. That's a recognition that allowing the victim a voice does allow that person to feel more empowered, and does allow for quicker healing. But I think a deeper examination of giving the victim the support to actually help them through even deeper than that, which is like, well, why did I choose for this to happen to me? What lessons does it hold for me? That's a very tricky space, and quite an advanced space to try to work in. And so having that element of a justice system would be reflective of quite a mature collective. And I think it's something to strive to. I think of the Truth and Reconciliation Commissions that have been held for large-scale human rights abuses. Rather than to have large trials like Nuremberg trial or whatever, we have and punish en masse. We actually have commissions, and the most famous one was the South African one, which was when Nelson Mandela got together with Bishop Desmond Tutu, and they were actually trying to heal a nation of deep hurt. And they came upon this Truth and Reconciliation path to do that. And they had subcommittees of the commission to deal with different parts. And a very important committee was to actually look at the victims and to address their position, address their grievances, as well as allow them to come forward and talk about it, rather than hide that away and say, either that's not important, or that's embarrassing, or that we're going to create our own stigma for you. You come out and you talk about, what it's done, what happened, how you feel. And that is that first step towards the deeper healing that I was talking about. So we most definitely have models, but with more spiritual insight, we can create even more profound ones.
Look, I think it's, for me, it is a re-education on who we are, what our reality is, for all legal questions, but particularly criminal law. We would learn so much about ourselves. We would evolve. That's
exactly.
Isn't that wonderful?
It goes back to what we were saying. Like, why have we got this distortion of unity that is free will? It's for the experience.
Yeah.
So the more we get from each experience as human beings, the richer our whole existence is on this particular plane.
And look, I think it's really funny in some ways. Henry Ford said it best: if you keep doing what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always got. And I think we to me, society is looking a little bit silly, like we're kindergartners or something. We just keep repeating the same thing, hoping for something different, and it's just not going to happen. We have to change a perspective.
What's happening now is that a lot of mud is coming up, right? If you want to remain in this analogy. So the kids are having a massive mud fight. And we need to be cleaning ourselves up and saying, like, why are we getting into this mud fight? How can we prevent future mud fights? Rather than flinging more mud and bringing more people into the mud fight and say, here's some mud for you. Here's some fresh new mud of a different kind. I'm going to throw on you. It's time to look at it and go, why are we even in this mud pit?
Yeah. Exactly. That's what I think as well. Speaking of mud, so our next episode is going to be on climate change.
That's going to be huge.
Yeah, I know. That's a beautiful topic. And I think that's where we'll probably end this conversation here too, because, yeah, the criminal law is pretty heavy. Yeah, climate change is as well, but I'm quite excited about that one also. So that's our next episode. So thank you so much, Geraldine, for being on doing this with me today. And we have so much fun talking about this because it's such a radical topic, but I think it has to be said. And we're being pretty forthright without going into too much detail because it's a very, very big topic. And but I think the same situations apply to climate change. So if you're interested in everyone in what we're talking about, please join us for the next episode. And we'll see you then. So thank you. Thanks for watching.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Virginia. It's a pleasure as always.
Bye.